Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. And again, this week, we're talking free agency on the defensive side of the ball, and got a lot of stuff prepared today to talk about, figure out what the Seahawks are going to do with minimal current cap space, some different strategies, some different players they'll be looking at. Who are we going to retain in our own free agency pool, and who might we look at outside of the organization to bring in to make us better? Keith, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I was going to say great, but I'm doing good. Great, I think, will be tomorrow when I'm not a little bit feeling. So on Sunday, 2 days ago, I got my second dose of the COVID vaccine, and yesterday was like miserable. I had like the full immune response craziness, and I could barely move and stay awake, and it was like so hard. And today I feel like 90% better, and so I'm just not quite 100%, but I'm close. And for that, I apologize to everyone, because that means you have to listen to me ramble like I usually do instead of being quiet, which would have happened if we would have recorded yesterday.
How many cups of coffee did you have, Keith?
When, today or yesterday?
Like 10 minutes before the show.
31.
Well, I'm glad you got this shot. That's awesome. That's something that I'm looking forward to for sure. My folks, bless their hearts, they're up there in age, and they've been qualified to get the vaccine now since the beginning, basically. And they just got their first dose on Sunday. And so they're in process, and I couldn't be happier for those guys, because they've been fairly socially isolated through this entire event, and it's been difficult, but they're champs about it. And so
yep. First dose isn't bad. They'll get like, it's like getting a tetanus shot.
I haven't talked to them since.
Arm gets sore, and it's a little like whatever. It's the second shot that really like clobbers you.
Yeah, that's not good. So hopefully they'll pull through that.
It is good, because that means it's working.
Oh, that's true.
So,
I've heard varying degrees of like uncomfortableness over the whole thing. Most people do complain about the second one, though, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Second one's always worse. But you know what? This is not a virus podcast. Last I checked, it's about
let's get right to it.
About Seahawks, and so maybe we should talk about that.
So first things first, well, it ties right into this. Mike Upati announced officially that he's retiring from the NFL after 11 years of service, the last couple with the Seahawks. And, it was good when it worked, and when he was in there, and when he was healthy, he was just, a bulldozer there. And then when he was fighting injury, or when they were resting him, or when he couldn't make games, it was a bit challenging. So I think we all kind of knew that, and Pete mentioned the upgrading of the offensive line, and we all immediately thought that was one of the two spots that they were talking about.
Well, he specifically mentioned left guard.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to guess.
He probably knew that Upati was retiring way before we did. So, So that confirms that we'll have at least one starter in 2021 that wasn't on the roster in 2020, or was on the roster but wasn't starting full time. I think Simmons has a chance. Jones has a chance if they bring back anybody. Free agent wise, we'll see, but chances are we're looking outside the team, either in the draft or free agency, to fill that spot.
Yeah, Jones and Simmons, and then of course if he manages to be healthy, which we've now had 2 years of waiting for that to happen, and it hasn't happened. But Haynes would be the third guy on the roster.
Posick struggled for a couple of years to have any sort of semblance of consistency regarding health, and last year he started all six. Well, not everyone. I think
he missed one.
Yeah,
he missed it. Basically, missed a game and a half.
16 games if you include the playoff, and that was pretty decent, serviceable quality from Posick, but he's an unrestricted guy this year. We'll have to see. Let's talk defense this time. Last time we got caught up in all sorts of other stuff at the front of the show and didn't have as much time, I think, as we may have wanted to do the offense. So let's get right into defense. And let's start up front in the trenches, where I think that they could probably stand to upgrade a little bit. But then I looked at the roster, the actual people returning, and it's not as bad as I thought.
It's really not.
We're gonna, depending on what happens to Carlos Dunlap, we could actually be in really fairly decent shape, save maybe a defensive tackle or filler or rotational type guys on the defensive end.
Cornerback is where I'm concerned.
Yeah, corner. Corner. If they trade Adams, then they would have to look at maybe bringing in a guy at strong safety. But other than that, maybe a linebacker if KJ Wright leaves. And it looks like, based on his comments yesterday in the media, where he's not going to take a hometown, and nobody expected him to, but he said, I would like to have a multi-year deal. I'm going to take the best offer available, is basically what he said. And I don't blame him. I think he's totally earned that right. He's never really gone out and tested free agency. I think it's a good thing for him. Good, he's always going to be a Seahawk, but he might be chasing the money, and rightly so, in this maybe last or second to last contract, because I think Seattle would be in a position to give him a 2-year deal with really it being a 1-year deal. I don't know that Seattle would extend further than that out, possibly just 1 year.
They might give him a 2-year deal that's actually a 2-year deal, but it would have to be at a value that makes sense for them. And I think one of the things that
what's a value that makes sense to you? Like 6.5, 7, maybe
4.5.
Where are we going to get that money?
No, see, here's the thing
that would come at the expense of, and we'll talk about it all, but it would come at the expense of something else.
Here's the thing: it doesn't necessarily have to, because here's the deal. This year, with the salary cap coming down, the amount of salary cap space around the league is significantly less than it usually is, with the same number of players that have expiring contracts. Plus, you have a bunch of teams like the Saints, the Packers, a few others that are way over the cap and are going to have to cut people just to get down to where the league isn't voiding contracts of star players in order to get them under the cap. So you have a situation where there's going to be more players than typical available and far less money around the league available. And that's going to lead to a lot of tiny contracts.
Yeah.
Supply and demand. And so if I was the Seahawks, I wouldn't offer anyone an extension or a new contract that's an unrestricted free agent. I would wait it out, because what you're going to find is there's going to be some really good players that are sitting out there late in free agency that are deciding, okay, I'll take a 1-year deal for anything just to get on a roster, and then turn it around in a year. And when there's money again, and come back out and try this again. And I think that what you're going to see is the Seahawks are going to be able to go and get a guy like Yannick on the defensive line, and then go, wow, we were able to get this star pass rusher for $5 million because we waited, and usually we'd have to pay 15. Well, now we can cut Carlos Dunlap, and that's $14 million contract. And hey, look, now we've got $9 extra million to go spend.
Right. I saw something out there on Twitter where it said Dunlap was likely to be cut by the Seahawks, and it was under the NFL Rumors Twitter handle. And I don't believe that that's affiliated with the league, and so I don't.
It's not.
I don't believe that that's valid, but it would make a little bit of sense in a financial situation, but not a player situation. And if we lose Carlos Dunlap, we're going to have to replace that player. Now, whether that comes with Darrell Taylor or not, the team can't really count on that at this point.
No, he's never played in a game. He has 0 NFL snaps. Now, they know they're going to get something from him, but you're not going to get a star player. My point is, you don't need to pay a defensive end $14 million this year to get that star player. Because of the way the cap is, and because of the way just supply and demand across the league is, you're going to be able to cut Dunlap, save that $14 million against the cap, and then find a comparable player for significantly less. If you're willing to,
if you're lucky, Keith,
you don't have to. You don't even have to be lucky.
You had to be lucky to get Carlos Dunlap. I mean, we've tried. Clowney was supposed to be that guy, and he just, injuries sucked the life out of him.
It's going to be this year is going to be different. It's not the same thing.
Well, let's talk about it. So before we have the general conversation about our players and free agents and starting on the defensive line, defensive tackle, let's talk about the teams that do have cap space. So there's like 1, 2, 3.
There's 15 teams that are over the cap
that have about 40 million and above. Now,
True.
all those teams are going to be able to play free agency like it was normal.
True, but
they're going to be the first ones out of the gate signing anybody that's premier at all. And premier guys are still going to get paid for the most part. There's a ledge. We just don't know where that ledge is going to be yet, and the timing of it. Like, how long is it going to take for those teams at the top to spend their money on premier guys and have the secondary market start opening up? And part of that secondary market will include players that would never been available at what they'll be signed at in general.
Yeah. So you're talking about take the top, 2 or 3 guys at each position and go, okay, those guys probably won't last long enough, but then everybody else that's available is going to see a massively depressed market. And yes. I hate to tell KJ Wright this, but he's one of those guys.
Yes.
He is not going to see the $7,
he's
$8
a linebacker,
million.
So
that's true. And he's not going to see the $7-8 million that he made this last year.
And he's 30. He'll be 32.
Yeah, he's older. He's got an injury history, and he's a linebacker, which isn't a valued position. And now you're talking about going into a market where most of the teams that would want a guy like him can't afford him. They don't have any cap room whatsoever. Like, they're over the cap, so they've got to cut guys just to get under. They don't have any flexibility to go sign anyone, and so he's going to go out there.
A guy just like KJ Wright to make room for KJ Wright.
Yeah,
it doesn't make a lot of sense.
And so what you're going to see is he's going to go out there. He's not going to find what he wants.
So you're saying that not only is the market going to be depressed, but this thing is going to last a lot longer than usual.
It is.
So they'll still finish up before the draft, but you'll still be seeing this market play out well into April.
I think so. I think we may see it play out through the draft and after the draft. Which, if you're one of the players, do not wait until after the draft, because that's just dumb.
Yes.
Because what happens is all those players get drafted and a bunch of roster spots get filled, and your market goes way down because teams that would have signed you now don't need you because they drafted a linebacker.
And your pool of potential suitors is really low at that point.
Yeah,
and there's only going to be a handful of teams that have any money left at that point. So
yeah. And so what you end up with, it will, but they're like this last year, Clowney waited until training camp.
Yeah. How many players do you believe are going to exit this entire situation unemployed through the 2021 season or at least through training camp?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because I would say it
more than normal.
Eliminating the bottom half, the bottom tier of the middle class of NFL free agents. So players that are making $3 million and under, those guys are going to have a hard time.
Those guys aren't going to get work.
Because instead you could replace those guys with quote unquote practice squad level guys at making 700
or 550, because if they're undrafted, that's about what they get their rookie year. And so you're talking about saving $3 million per player.
So this is what I was arguing about with the whole cap and the league deciding that instead of 198 and trying to keep it at that level, that it was at 175. That was the floor. They've raised the floor, quote unquote, to 180, likely maybe inch up beyond that.
I've heard the floor is now 183.
Okay, so 180, 183, 185. It's still 15 grand, below where it was. And what it's going to do is it's going to eliminate a certain class of player that's overall, when you take a look at the entire NFL, is going to create a talent deficit in the NFL that will never be able to be recouped. I mean, it'll take 2 or 3 years to cycle through because, but so you'll have this year will affect the talent in the league for 2 or 3 years to come. Some of those players will never play again.
Well, and the thing is that if teams and those players are smart, what they'll do is they're like, oh, we want this player who normally would make $3.5 million, but we're not going to do that. So we're going to sign them to an MSB deal, right? MSD means minimum salary benefit. And what that does is it gives you the right to sign a player at whatever the minimum is for their years of service. And it's got a maximum signing bonus for whatever it is, but it's usually small. It's like $50,000 or $100,000, depending on the number of years. But they count the same against the salary cap as a second-year player. So if you sign a veteran and you have to pay them $1.2 million because that's the minimum for their service time, they're still only going to count $720,000 against the cap, because that's what a second-year player does. And I think you're going to see way more MSB contracts this year than we've ever seen in the past, because
you got to fill out your roster.
You got to fill out your roster, and it gives you an opportunity to sign veteran players, experienced players, and talented players rather than just grabbing and having a roster full of undrafted free agents.
All right, so let's talk about free agency. Last week we did the offense. This week we're going to do the defense. Let's start with Jaron Reed. Let's start with our own guys really quick. We got Jaron Reed, defensive tackle. He's going to be, he's not, what I want to do is I wanted to go over the roster and who's going to be unrestricted, who's going to be on the roster, so we kind of know what we need. Jaron Reed's got 1 year left on his deal. 13.975. It seems a little high to be spending on Jaron Reed. Maybe they readjust. That might be a contract they have earmarked to adjust. Poona Ford's a restricted free agent. I wanted to go over this information really quick too, just so everyone knew. The first round tender this year is scheduled to be at $4.76 million. The second round tender is $3.38. Right of first refusal tender, which is the original round, is $2.13. He was undrafted, so that would be that. I'm leaning towards the second round tender on this.
He'll get that. He'll get the second round tender.
Yeah. Okay. So we're in agreement on that. And the crazy thing, Keith, is he was paid as the 250th out of 253rd interior defensive lineman in 2020, and gave you, according to the OTC valuation in 2020, he should have made $9.286 million. So I think the Seahawks got pretty good value out of him.
They did. And the thing is that was what he got paid by the Seahawks. But the NFL has a program that fixes some of that. So they take players that are late round picks that are playing way above their draft status and gets them some extra money. And that was one of the things that happened when they locked in everyone at certain contract values and said that players wouldn't become a free agent until after their fourth year. And one of the things they had to do in order to get the union to agree to that was to come up with this program that takes the players that outperform their contract significantly that are in their first few years of their rookie deal and give them some extra money. And Poona Ford was a large benefactor of that particular program this year.
And then Brian Monet, defensive tackle, kind of came on a little bit. He went in 2019, an undrafted guy that came on. So he's on the roster. And then they've got a couple future guys, Miles Adams and Cedric Lattimore. And so they could bring back like a Jonathan Bullard or DeMontre Moore, guys that could play three tech, that could move inside. Those guys are listed on the roster as defensive ends. We'll talk about those guys in a minute. So you could pad the roster. There's a couple guys that kind of fill that three tech stuff, but Poona is really the only guy, and Brian Monet, that can play, the nose or inside for you.
Both those guys can play the nose.
And do you think that the team would look at in free agency for a guy? They lost Harrison, towards the back third of the season. Are we missing a player there, or do we just need to, based on the money that's available and the draft capital, do you think we just need to fill a spot, a rotation kind of back into the roster thing?
Well, I mean, it depends on what happens with Reed, because Reed is a guy that has been a starter for years and had a really good year in 2018 and a really kind of off year in 2019, and then had an up and down year, or we should say a down and up year, because he was really ineffective early in 2020 and then came on and played well down the stretch. What happens with him? Because without him in the mix, now you've got one guy who's good in Ford, one guy who we believe is up and coming in Monet, and nothing else. And so you have to add.
And you've got Ford and Reed essentially on contract years.
Yeah, and so you have to add you have to add depth anyways. You have to have someone in the rotation. You can't just have those two guys. So if Reed ends up disappearing off the roster because of salary cap concerns, you absolutely have to add someone. If he doesn't, and they were figure out some way that he stays on the roster, which I have a hard time seeing that happening, then that gives them a lot more flexibility, and they may go into the year like they did this last year, and that's with those three guys as your primary guys, and then looking to see if a young guy steps up to take that fourth spot. Now, nobody stepped up this last year, and so they went with getting Harrison, and they had to bring him in. They had to wait for him to get shape, and really
didn't offer too much.
He didn't. I mean, he wasn't bad. He did his job,
they picked Brian Monet over Harrison in the end.
Yeah, they did, because Monet had been playing better before his injury, and Monet was just playing really well, and so they ended up being like, no, we're gonna. And then Harrison was like, well, if I'm not gonna play, I don't want to be a healthy scratch. So
I think Jaron Reed is a valuable asset to the team. He's not a building block per se, but that loss I think would be a pretty sizable hole to try to fill. I think he's worth like $8 or $9 million a year, not almost 14. When they gave him that contract, I thought it was elevated, kind of odd a little bit. It was a very large 2-year extension to give to a player that you were basically just trying to figure out if he was going to be consistent or not.
Yeah.
So that was kind of an odd contract, but here we are, and it's a big cap hit. And he's got $5 million of dead money. So, I mean, we could save close to $9 million if Jaron Reed was traded or released. I just don't know that he would be released. I would think that he'd have some value out there, and I would look for a 5th round pick, something like that.
Well, and especially in this,
you could get a 4th or something, but
so he's basically a $14 million cap number for Seattle, but any team that accepts him only takes on
the dead money.
Yeah, so it's 8.325.
Right.
And that's actually a good number for him and his talent and production.
I agree. And that's why he's a tradable asset.
I think he is a tradable asset, because you're not taking on, if you're another team, you're not taking on a $14 million defensive tackle. You're taking on an $8.3 million defensive tackle.
And you're like, perfectly suitable for his production.
Yeah, and so that's a valuable contract for them. And so it's worth more to another team than it is Seattle. And so I could see him being traded. But in this year, when contracts are going to be lower,
the trade market is going to be so screwed up.
Yeah. And so getting a 5th round pick, I think, would be fine. Like that. I mean, for a player of his talent, you'd think that you'd be like, okay, maybe we can get a 4, maybe we can get a 3.
Exactly.
But no, this year you're going to get a 5 or a 6. And I think that's going to be as far as you can expect as far as this year. But
see, I think that in lieu of dropping back from 56 to say 62 or 65 or 70 in the draft, if you could pick up a 5th round pick for Reed, maybe Schneider doesn't trade back and we end up with a higher quality, maybe an impact starter kind of a guy at 56 that you normally might not find at 70 or 75 or whatever. You might have picked up a 4th rounder and a 5th rounder or a 4th and 6th by moving back, but at what cost? So, okay, I know it would be the cost of Jerron Reed, but is there anybody else on the roster that could take his spot? I don't think so. You'd have to go out. Let's look at some free agents that might be available, and keep in mind the 0 tech, the 1 tech spot too, with Puna Ford on a contract here. Now this may not be the year that you look ahead so much on your roster. You might be playing for this year because it is kind of so screwed up, and next year's contract situation is much better. But there's guys out there, top of the line guys. We're just not going to be able to get those guys at all. There's no reason to even look at like the Shelby Harrises or the JJ Watts, Leonard Williams, all that kind of stuff. They might try like a Tyrone Crawford kind of a guy. He's older, like a 31-year-old that's coming off of a fairly decent contract, like a $40 million 4-year deal. But now he's more of like a $4 or $5 million player. And so a guy like that could come in and, he's a good guy. He's kind of a 3-tech guy, can get can push the pocket a little bit. I think 6'3" or 6'4", 290, something like that. Back in the day ran like a 4.89 40, but he's 31 years old now. He'd be a perfectly suitable guy to come in and maybe take Reed's place for a season.
Yeah, I mean that's a good name to throw in there. I was thinking like, if we could go get a guy like Jonathan Hankins who played with the Raiders, because he's a little younger, yeah. But he's also going to cost a little more because he's a little younger, and I think he might be one of those guys that.
So is he a guy that pushes the pocket, or is he just a run stuffer guy? I mean, 320 pounds.
I mean, he's kind of a do-it-all thing. He's not a great pass rusher, but he's not a bad pass rusher.
I was thinking Sheldon Rankins too.
He's kind of like, Jerron Reed.
No, that's right. Absolutely.
If you really want to go after a pass rusher, a guy that can really get after the quarterback from the inside, and you're going to make the switch, Derek Wolfe, who's played with the Ravens last year, played with the Denver Broncos before, is a guy that gets after the quarterback. He's a guy that is maybe not as strong against the run, but man, does he generate pressure up the middle. And that would be a guy, he's 31, coming off a pretty good year. And when he played like 60% of the snaps for the Ravens, I think that that's something that the Seahawks might consider, because I don't think at that age he's going to get a big contract. So he's going to be out there a little longer. And you're like, hey, if we can bring him in for, let's say, $4 million on a 1-year deal, trade Reed and his $8.3 million salary and save, 4.3, and just basically you switch from from a guy that kind of does everything okay to a guy who really rushes the passer well. That's not a bad trade.
And they play a similar amount of snaps too. I mean, Wolfe was playing like 60% of the snaps. Last year he made $3 million on a deal. We might even be able to get him for less. Who knows? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's a guy out there that would be suitable as well. Malik Collins, 6'2", 308, kind of fills that role. He's 26 years old. You could probably get him on a $3 million deal. Daquan Jones is more of a run stopper out there, more of a Puna Ford type, but he's 6'4", 322.
He's
so
huge.
He doesn't look like Puna Ford.
6'4" versus 5'10".
He ran a 5'3", 540 at the combine. So, but he's a guy that's probably going to cost $5-6 million. It really depends on the market. It's hard to estimate some of these contracts, and we might be throwing out numbers now. These are under normal circumstances. The further you go into free agency and the longer these folks last, those dollars are just going to really shrink up. It's just going to be kind of crazy. How about defensive end? Seattle's roster currently, or I'll point to 2020 roster and I'll list the unrestricted guys as well. Jonathan Bullard, unrestricted. DeMonte Moore, unrestricted. We got LJ Collier's got 2 years left on his deal as a 5-tech. Rasheem Green, same thing, 1 year. Brandon Jackson's unrestricted, knocked out in a preseason scrimmage game, literally knocked out with a major concussion. And I've heard that he's unlikely to return to football because he has the same basic neck injury that Chandler and Averill have. And so
yeah,
they're advising him to not play anymore.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, that Cam Chancellor's come out and been like, "Nah, dude. Like, I tried for 2 years to get this right." He's like, "It's not, don't do it. Don't risk your family and all that." And so I could see that. I mean, he was a rotational back of the roster guy anyway.
I didn't even want to say it, but yes, he was, regardless of injury, he was not going to be back on the roster because he just wasn't that good at what he was supposed to be doing. All right. Carlos Dunlap, he's got a year of unguaranteed money at $14.03 million sitting there. The team adjusted his salary during the year so that they could fit him under the cap and made him basically unguaranteed this year so that he would either be restructured or released so that he could go out and test free agency. And I'm not exactly sure what the team intends to do. He's got 87.5 career sacks. He's got 500 tackles. He's got 60 pass deflections. We all saw with our own eyes when he came in and made that defensive line respectable for the first time in the season and for the first time in a year or two. And I'd hate to lose him because the impact was so obvious, but at that number, it's almost unattainable to keep him on the roster without having that thing adjusted one way or another, because something has got to give. And there are 3 or 4 contracts on this team where that's where it's got to give. Like, it's Carlos Dunlap, it's Jamal Adams, it's Bobby
Russell
Wagner,
Wilson and Bobby Wagner.
Dwayne Brown have some money there. So what do you do with Carlos Dunlap, Keith? If you're the team?
Honestly, I think that you cut him and let him test the market, and then you sit back and wait. And you wait, because look at what is available.
We're going to be talking about this a lot this year.
Right.
Like, the patience factor is going to be critical.
But look at what's available. Let me just read off the top 7 names: Matt Judon, Melvin Ingram, Shaq Barrett, Bud Dupree, Jadeveon Clowney, Yannick, I can't pronounce his last name, Ryan Kerrigan, Justin Houston.
As Dunlap.
No, they're not.
You got to go to the second tier, don't you?
Who you said it yourself. There's 4 teams in the NFL that have the money to go spend on elite players.
Well, I mean, there's 10 teams overall that have over $15 million in cap.
True, which doesn't give them to go spend money on.
There's only
on
4 teams that have over $30 million.
Yeah,
and 2 of those have 45 million and more, 60 million.
Yeah, but so the Jaguars are going to go sign a couple of those guys, and the Jets are going to go sign a couple of those guys, and there's still going to be a bunch of guys left that are going to be surprised.
I mean, look at the safety. Look at the safeties alone are going to eat.
Yeah,
we'll talk about the safety.
We'll get there.
It's crazy.
But I'm just saying, like, you just look at that list. There is more good talent in that list of the top 7 or 8 guys than there is money to be spent on them.
I know. And to further illustrate your point, that just pushes down the guys that are second tier into our range even more, because some of those first tier guys aren't going to get paid. And so if 1 or 2 of those first tier guys, legit first tier guys, can't get paid, the second tier guys are going to look awfully attractive, and their prices are going to bottom out. Like what guys that normally would have been, in the second tier market would have been $7 or $8 million are now 4 or 5, and they're taking 1-year deals because they can't.
Yeah,
they don't want. They can't sacrifice 2 or 3 years of salary.
The Benson Mayoas who made $3 million last year are, if they get a contract at all, it will be as a MSB contract, a league minimum.
That is crazy. Seattle. I mean, bad for the players, and there'll be a long conversation about all this, but good for the Seahawks, because I think the Seahawks will be able to play in that market. After a few adjustments.
And that's why I was saying, if you go ahead and you cut Dunlap, you add Dunlap's name to that list I already gave you.
He's such a good cultural fit, and he loves to be here. It's just such a sad deal. I just wish that there was a way. Isn't the alternative to see if he'll take a pay cut?
You have to ask.
And
you have
to extend him with a instead of, he's not going to make 14. He's not going to make 14 from anybody. What he's really a $8 million guy. $7 to $8 million. That's where he should be at. So if the Seahawks went in with a 3-year, $21 million deal, but guarantee like 10, Carlos Dunlap would take some guaranteed money. I think that would make a huge difference in
so you void deal. You void this $14 million year.
Yes.
And you give him a 3-year deal, 21, and his cap number this year drops from 14 to 5 because the signing bonus gets paraded out. Saying. And so then you gain $9 million and you keep the guy.
That's what I would try to do first. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. I would. That would be. Those kind of deals make so much sense to us. We're not the ones being asked to leave money on the table.
True. But I don't know that Carlos Dunlap is leaving money on the table because he's not. The team would either cut him or trade him or restructure. Those are the 3 choices. He's not going to play under that $14 million 1-year unguaranteed deal.
And he won't get it from anyone else either. Yeah. That's the key. It's one thing to be like, you're not going to play into this contract.
Well, okay, I want to ask you.
Cut me. Let me go into the open market, and I'll make the same money from someone else.
I wanted to ask you about this because guys like Joe Fan out there, and I love Joe, and guys like Duger are out there and totally counter to what I just said. Like, it makes no sense for Carlos Dunlap to and he's a good player, and look what he did, and he did that last year. He was very helpful. Thank you very much. He's still not a $14 million player. Last year's Seahawks paid him $2 million to come and play for him. That was an exceptional value. Now they're doing him a service by putting all of his money in unguaranteed so that they can make a decision. They didn't do this without a long conversation about what they were really intending to do. And they're really intending to restructure or release so that he can go out and test the market, which was his request, and or re-sign him, And so I don't know. It just doesn't, it's not going to stay this way. This is an inflection point on the roster, and you have to use that money. That money has to be used for maximum benefit because there's not a lot of it to go around.
Yeah, I mean, the Seahawks are in a spot. They have $4 million in cap room. That's it. They have $1.5 million in usable cap room because the rest of it has to be reserved for, the practice squad and rookies and that kind of stuff.
That isn't even enough to tender Puna Ford.
No, it's not.
Let's be real.
Yeah, and so they have to do something. So to say, oh, I don't want to do that. We don't want to lose him. Then where are you getting your cap room from?
Yeah. Well, then you're cutting Dwayne Brown. You want to cut Dwayne Brown?
You want to cut your left tackle?
No, I don't want to cut Dwayne Brown. Well, do you want to trade Russell Wilson? Oh, no, absolutely not.
What about Bobby Wagner? You want to get rid of him?
Exactly.
So the money has to,
or whatever.
The money has to come from somewhere. Right. I think if you can find a suitor for Jerron Reed for a 5th or a 6th round pick, you do that because you save yourself $8 million. I think you offer Carlos Dunlap a deal like what you were talking about. Drop his cap number way down, push some money out, give him a couple of years and some guaranteed money that he currently doesn't have.
Exactly. That's the key right there.
And give him some security going forward. And
it's a short enough deal where he can go out again.
Mm-hmm. And so, offer him that, or just say, what do you want? If we're going to void this year, do you want a 3-year deal or do you want a 2-year deal? So that way you can test it when you're a year younger, whatever.
And the cap goes up to $250 million by then, and there's a lot more money to be played. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, go ahead and figure out find a central point for them. And if he says, no, I would rather test the market than to take what you're offering, then you have to cut him.
Yeah.
Well, you have to get that $14 million.
And just so everybody understands, we're not crazy here. Over the cap valuation on Carlos Dunlap is $5.6 million APY.
Yeah. I have a hard time
with
that one because of the situation and the way it went down in Cincinnati. His production does not match his talent. during his time in Cincinnati, and since that was a chunk of the season,
Yes.
if you look at just his Seattle numbers and you project them out over the same number of games, his value would be much higher. So,
but he is 32, and we all know that at some point the cliff happens to players, and it's without warning. Some player wakes up one day, he comes to work, all of a sudden he can't get to the quarterback anymore. He gets injured, nicked up more. He's slower, all that kind of stuff. That can happen to guys that are 32 years old, especially pass rushers. Pass rushers usually can stick around a little bit, but they do offer diminishing returns over time. And so you've got to be careful with this sort of a contract. Okay. Benson Mayo, you mentioned unrestricted free agent. I think that would be a great bargain situation to sign in mid-April to fill out your roster right before the draft, so you have your bases covered. Alton Robinson came on last year. He's got 3 years left on his deal. He's not going anywhere. 4 years for Darrell Taylor. He failed to accrue a season last year, so we still have him on a 4-year deal, and we'll see where he's at. He practiced with the team at the end, and signs are pointing up. But we've got a full off season to get through with very little news. It's probably going to come out, and we'll see where we're at when camp arrives in July. So the second tier market is the market I was kind of looking at. You mentioned all those frontier guys. I don't know that we're necessarily hunting for those type of guys.
I don't think we're hunting.
We had a big, huge trade, and we had a huge influx of cash. Those guys are going to be off the market, swept up by teams that can actually afford to pay them.
I think. Well, my thought with the reason for mentioning them was, yes, they're going to eat the entire defensive end market money.
Yes,
and leave nothing left. And the other alternative is, if any of those guys end up hanging out there a little bit longer, you might be able to get a guy like Yannick or Ingram for $4 or $5 million on a 1-year deal.
Yes.
And then you cut Dunlap and you save $10 million against the cap.
You might end up having to entice them in with a 2-year deal with a ton of bonus money up front, so that it's, they're essentially playing on a 1-year deal, but they're getting lots of money regardless. Yeah. Okay. So in the secondary market, there's a couple of guys at the top that are kind of mixed in a little bit with the strong linebacker spot. Hassan Reddick had a great year with Arizona. Arizona elected not to use their 5th year option on him. He was a 1st-round pick early on. They had a misfit time with him. They had a hard time figuring out where he belonged, and it turns out he ends up being a strong side linebacker, which is really where he should have been the entire time. He played 80% of the snaps last year, 6'1", 235. He's 26 years old. He can rush the pass. He's kind of like a Bruce Irvin kind of guy.
He is a younger Bruce Irvin. He is what Bruce Irvin was when he left Seattle. About the same age, same skill set, same position. If they could get him,
check this stat line out for 2020. 12.5 sacks, 63 tackles, 6 forced fumbles, 4 pass defenses, and 9 tackles for loss. Like, he played out of his mind. Once he was in the right spot, he was a great player in college. Mm-hmm. And he would be an outstanding get, especially if we lost KJ Wright. You could move Brooks over. You keep Brooks at the weak side, and you could bring a guy like Hassan Reddick in, and that would really take the place of like a Carlos Dunlap as far as production, rushing the passer as well. A guy like Rasheem Green or Collier off the field on 3rd downs, and have Hassan Reddick come up and play that and bring in a safety. That would be an ideal situation.
Yeah, so he would play outside linebacker in your base defense, and when you go to your nickel or your dime, he comes up the defensive end, and you pull out one of your bigger run stuffing defensive ends like Collier. It would make perfect sense.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing they did with Bruce Irvin when he was here, and what they were planning to do this year with Bruce Irvin, but he got hurt. I'd love that. In the same idea, the same mold, but a little bit older. Leonard Floyd.
Yes.
Coming in from the Rams. He freaking dominated Seattle.
Yeah, I think he earned a big, huge payday. I don't know if we can afford him. I mean, Hassan Reddick did too, but he's only got 1 year of real good production. I think Hassan Reddick is still probably going to get paid. I mean, but he's like an $8 million guy. I think Leonard Floyd's probably going to end up getting like 12, 13 or whatever. Another guy in the same mold that's a little younger is Tyus Bowser, 6'3", 242, age 25, from Baltimore. He's probably in the $4.5 million range. He's kind of got the similar skill set. More traditional guys, Terrell Basham, 6'4", 269, ran a 4.7 40. So Pete likes speed from the defensive end. That's pretty good speed for that size. 3rd round pick in 2017. Dwayne Smoot. Dwayne had, I liked him in the draft. He was injured a little bit this last year, but he's kind of a base defensive end, 5 tech kind of a guy. Romeo Aquara, that 26-year-old. He'd be a good guy out there as well. Carl Lawson. I think it was Dunlap's defensive end mate out of Cincinnati. That guy might be an interesting guy. I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of names after that. There's not a lot of need. I mean, especially if Dunlap stays and we've got Collier and Green on one side, you've got Alton Robinson and Taylor on the other, and you've got Dunlap kind of playing all over the place. You really only probably need a filler guy in there, a guy that they might be able to get in the either late rounds or just get a guy like Benson Mayo come in on a big discount at the end of free agency. So I'm not too worried about the defensive line overall that we just talked about. It's pretty solid, really.
Yeah, I think that you're going to see them wait. I really think that's the thing. You're going to see them sit back and wait, and except for the Carlos Dunlap situation, which has to work itself out. He'll either be cut or be extended at a discount, and they'll figure it out. But other than that, you're going to see them just kind of wait this out, because there's way more talent than there is money. And so there's going to be some really cheap gets. And that was one of the ways that Seahawks built their contender in 2013, 2014 was Avril and Bennett both came in at below market value, not because they wanted to, they just waited out the market. And both those guys were like, there's no money left. And so they took a deal, and the Seahawks were the benefits of it. And I think you're going to see something similar. You're going to see guys wait out the market, and then you're going to see, Dwayne Smoot sign for way less than you think he's going to, or Tyus Bowser is going to,
right, exactly.
You're going to get guys in that are going to add to the mix for rather cheap. And I think that this is something that's going to happen at every position. I think it's going to happen more at pass rusher than we think, because there's simply so many names.
Well, and those
available.
guys typically are the guys that get paid. I mean, you're going to pay your defensive ends, your pass rush specialists, your offensive tackles, your wide receivers, your premier corners, and everyone else is after that. And so with so little money overall, really, to pay way more folks that really deserve the contracts, that have been getting those type of contracts, it's just going to shove everything down. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be sad, and it's going to be opportunistic, if you just look at it from a business perspective. So let's talk about linebackers and safeties. We had Rob Staten on the show a couple weeks back, who talked about the investment that Seattle has made at the linebacker and safety position over the last couple of years. And it's been pretty intense. I mean, Bobby Wagner's getting 17 this year. He's going to make 20 next year. KJ Wright had a decent contract this last year. I think he had an $11 million cap hit.
Surprised that I'm still surprised that they paid him. All of that, because
I am too. I mean, we thought for sure that he was
they needed the cap room. And he was coming off a bad year, and they were like, no, we're going to keep him around. And I'm like, cool. And they got value from him, even at that higher number. He had a great year, and I don't want to say that he didn't.
He was the 7th ranked linebacker in the league.
But I'm still surprised that he played under that contract, and that he wasn't either cut.
I bet you it was right there. I mean, to me, it was a little odd that they did. Actually, I was surprised. I thought for sure he'd either be cut or it would be he would sign on for another year, and they would blend that thing a little bit. So KJ Wright's unrestricted. This is the first time that he's had an opportunity to go look at free agency, test free agency, find out his value. He was on the radio the other day, said that, I don't want to take a hometown discount. And this is why, because I produce on the field. It's what I do on the football field that counts. I need to be paid like a premier linebacker with a Super Bowl ring and all the experience that I bring. And damn right. I mean, he's earned it. And I wish him the best, whether it's with the Seahawks or with somebody else. I just don't think the Seahawks are going to go up and pay him where I think that he wants to be paid. And we'll talk about his market in a second. But if he wants to be paid, $10, $11 million again, just like the last couple of years, it's going to be different this time, because even though his production, he's been able to be consistent on the field. I think he played every game in the last couple of years, as opposed to the couple of years prior, where he had all the knee issues and so forth. I think 1 year he played 4 games, four games. He's 32. I think that Seattle would be willing to pay him if they could afford it, and that's to be determined. But if they could afford it, I think they would go as high as 6 or 7 for KJ, and give him a 2-year deal. $14 million with 6 guaranteed, something like that. But I agree with Rob that you've got to start shifting some resources from the linebacker spot. You've drafted Brooks in the first round the year prior, Cody Barton the year before that in the 3rd round. You moved up to get him. You need to start creating a youth movement here and getting these dollars down. Bobby's still going to be there. He's your quarterback of the defense. We've talked about maybe it makes sense to move him, move on from some of that cap money. But you can't fill the leadership, the production on the field, at least right away, with sending Bobby out. And what are you going to get in return? So, and then Jordan Brooks going to be here for a while. Cody Barton still got 2 years. Ben Burkervin, special teams guy, he's still got 2 years. Bruce Irvin still, he was on the roster. He obviously got the ACL. He's unrestricted this year. He's a guy, actually, that if he rehabbed correctly and he's all good to go, you're not going to give him $5 or $6 million like the Seahawks did in 2020 to come back. You're going to look at a veteran minimum kind of deal. It's like, yeah, we did you a favor in 2020. We brought you in. We paid you $5.5 million. You barely played for us. This year, we're going to give you a veteran minimum contract. You're going to come in and it's going to be all good. So,
well, yeah, and basically what you're telling him is, you have a year. Let's get you healthy. Let's show at the league that you're, Bruce Irvin again, and then you go out a year from now and try again.
Yeah. So you don't go for the Hassan Reddick guys and pay $8-10 million for a guy like that. You pay a guy like Bruce Irvin to come in and give you 80% of what Reddick's going to give you, and at least the pass rushing part of it. And you roll with that because you're surrounding him with really good players. If Jamal Adams comes back, you got Brooks. You're going to be okay in the middle of the field. And then Shaquem Griffin's on a restricted free agent tender.
I don't think you don't tender him.
Or you give him the right of first refusal tender, and even that though is a $2 million deal. I just don't know.
The problem with that tender is that once he signs it,
him, and you let him hit free agency, and if you can sign him for a veteran minimum deal, a deal that's commensurate with his play, which is he's a special teams guy, and a guy like that on a roster is going to make a veteran minimum.
Yeah, and so if I'm him and the Seahawks give him that right of first refusal tender, I run as fast as I can to Seahawk headquarters to sign that, because that guarantees you're making $2 million.
Yes,
and he'll never see a $2 million contract. And
I agree. I mean, I love the guy, but he's not he's not going to play in the NFL. He's just not. He's too undersized, and he gets washed out on stuff, and he's not assignment. Something's going on there where he's not picking up the playbook or whatever. But he's a great special teams guy. Good character.
He's a fantastic special teams guy.
Potentially a great leader of men. at some point in his life, and it's good to have those guys on the team. You just have to do it in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Out there in free agency. So let's just say if we in order for the Seahawks to move on from a guy like Bobby Wagner, and say there was a team out there that willing to give the Seattle Seahawks a second round pick this year and a fourth or fifth next year, you'd take that deal, and you're saving the cap, and you've got some draft capital. What do you look at in free agency to help your team? There's a couple of options out there.
There are
You
some.
could spend considerably less money and still have really decent linebacker production, because most linebackers in the NFL are paid 1/3 the price that Bobby Wagner is getting at $17 million. You get a guy at like $4 or $5 million at middle linebacker. That's a really pretty solid linebacker in the NFL. So
yeah, he's not a multi-year All-Pro
right.
Hall of Fame level talent though. So yeah, I mean this is a sense
Brooks
where
as well. So Brooks could take over for you in the middle if you needed to, and you could find somebody out there on the strong side or the weak side.
Yeah, and there's plenty of guys out there. Let's say they do for financial reasons, they have to make that move and get the draft capital and the.
Would Bobby and Wright go at the same time? Gosh, that would
that would be so hard.
That would, and it would be a hard adjustment for the team.
Yeah, there's a lot. That's all that leadership and talent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm confident in Brooks. I think that eventually he's going to be, he was
really good last year,
right? But it's going to take him. He's all of a sudden going to be thrust into a role that he's unfamiliar with. So,
because now he needs to be the star linebacker. There's some interesting guys.
Jalen Brown or Avery Williamson or Eric Wilson out of Minnesota or something like that. I was thinking guys that have played consistently in the past, have given their teams a nice percentage of their snaps, that are fairly reasonable in projected contract numbers is kind of what I'm looking at.
So I can't say bring in Levante David.
Man, that would be a dream, wouldn't it? That would be awesome. That would set you up at the linebacker spot with Brooks and David for years to come. That would be amazing.
Well, because so here's the funny non-connection between there. When the Seahawks drafted Bobby Wagner, I was doing my shadow draft. That's right. Where you go through when the Seahawks make a pick. I pick a player at that spot. So it kind of gives like an idea of how the draft would have fallen if I been in charge. And the player I picked at that spot when the Seahawks picked Bobby Wagner was Levante David.
Yeah.
And obviously the Seahawks picked the right guy, but I wasn't far off because David has been a phenomenal player.
Who was the guy that ended up going to New England in that same draft? Hightower? I think I was the Hightower guy. I didn't even know Bobby Wagner existed. I don't think. And if I did, he was kind of a peripheral guy. And when they drafted him, I was like, "Who's Bobby Wagner?" And you go to your draft books and look them all up and stuff.
And you're like, Utah State. They drafted someone from Utah State.
Right. So
I discredited him for that.
I was just looking at Levante David, his contract, and his current contract paid him $10 million. All of it was guaranteed. He's a free agent, but he gave the Buccaneers 99.3% of the snaps at 31 years old. That's really good, consistent production. Every snap you're out there. If you traded Bobby and got the numbers off the books, you could replace him with a guy like that. But would you? Or would you use that money to upgrade your offensive line?
I think you'd use it elsewhere. Because why would you trade your Hall of Fame level guy for a Pro Bowl, very good, very good player who's just not quite him, if the money's the same, right? So I just bring that up because I'm like, he's such a good player and someone that we really like. But now you've got to look down the list, right? You got to go find someone else. And I think that you could, I think you could go through and find Eric Wilson from the Vikings. I think he's 27.
He's kind of an off the ball guy. He would be kind of a KJ Wright replacement.
He'd be a good one.
He'd be excellent too. I mean, he had 122 tackles in 2020, 3 sacks, 3 interceptions, 9 quarterback hits, 8 pass defenses. I mean, he's really good. Like KJ Wright's really good in pass coverage. This would be a guy that's similar in pass coverage that KJ Wright is. And KJ Wright, I think, ranked 8th in the NFL out of all linebackers in pass coverage. I'm not sure exactly where Eric Wilson is, but I do believe that he's highly thought of in that respect. And he played like 95% of the snaps for them too. So injury concerns are not there. And you got a guy that can come in, and you're probably going to end up having to pay a guy like that in a depressed market if he hangs around, maybe $3 or $4 million.
Yeah. And so that's kind of be where I'd look. The other thing that you could do is if you really want to go through and be like, okay, how do we do what Matt Staten said and really change the makeup of where the money on defense is being spent? Is you could go out and find Reuben Foster, who did not play last year, and get him for next to nothing, but has all the talent in the world. And hope that, a reclamation project, let him reclaim his, his value and that kind of stuff. And there are.
Yeah, I mean, he was the 49ers picked him in the first round. I think he was a 49er at one point. God, where did he play, Keith? It was like Auburn or something like that. Anyway, I loved him in the draft. He was a
Alabama.
He was a great player, and I don't know how he was injured last year. But he would be a guy, if he didn't play last year, if he was injured, he's a free agent this year. There's a guy that, somebody's going to have to take a chance on, and would be available later on in free agency. And we're going to need guys like that to fill out the roster this year. And especially if KJ comes back or Bobby's back, and you've got one more year with the gang, and you've got Jordan Brooks on the other side, you're really just looking, for a filler piece. Now, if KJ Wright leaves, like maybe some of us are anticipating, you're going to need a player that can actually step on the field and play. And so I'm not exactly sure if you trust a guy that didn't play last year with that job, but he'd certainly be a guy that you would consider, especially if you're happy with the production prior to this last year. So
but if you have a guy like Bruce Irvin re-signed, and he plays that strong side linebacker, because that's really what you're looking at. And that's one of the other thing that's I think is going to work against KJ Wright is that his move from weak side to strong side, which actually revitalized his production, moved him from into a position that is less valuable, and has a lesser market. And so,
I mean, he probably considers himself diverse. I mean, he can play either side, and if you're in a 3-4 system, you can play both sides.
True. In Seattle's defense, though, he moved into a position that's less valuable, and he's not displacing Brooks out of the weak side spot.
Man, do you think that the New York Jets wouldn't want to have a guy like KJ Wright?
Oh, they'd love a guy like KJ Wright. I think he's going to end up
with their new head coach.
I think he's going to. That's a spot where he could end up, especially if he, when he recognizes the market isn't what it is, and then they've got all that cap money. He's like, hey, I'll come in.
I mean, New York Jets are the market.
Yep, them in Jacksonville. Right. But yeah, so they've got all that money, and he can be like, hey, I know, like, the market is I'm going to make 3, but you guys have the money. Pay me 4.5, and I will come be the leader that your defense needs.
Keith. He's going to make more than 4.5. I don't care. Somebody will generate money somewhere.
I don't think so. I just don't think linebackers are going to get that this year.
I think even Seattle would sign him up for 5, if not 6.
I don't think linebackers.
In fact, I guarantee they offer him a contract that's at least 5 or 6.
I don't know.
When you're on a 1-year deal, just before he goes out the door.
If you look at the contracts of all of the free agents that are coming in, there are 6 players out of all of the linebackers that made more than $5 million. Mm-hmm. That's
exactly.
It.
That's why
6.
That's why Bobby Wagner is so out of whack. There's no reason. There's no market push to pay him that much, money. So anywho, we'll find out. Let's talk about safeties. Jamal Adams is the real big one here. He's not up for a contract this year, but he is playing on a 1-year deal that's completely unguaranteed at $9.86 million. He's, the team, we acquired him for 2 first-rounders and a third and McDougald. So clearly the intent was to try to keep him long-term. I think the team intends to try to keep him long-term, but something's got to give. We've talked about this over and over. Something's got to give. There's a pile of money there. The team needs money. So to me, there's 2 choices. You either extend Adams and either keep his cap hit similar or slightly lower this year, and keep him in the fold for all time going forward, or you figure out what you can get for Jamal Adams, because you do 2 things by releasing Jamal Adams. You hurt your team a little bit defensively, but you gain $10 million in cap savings, and you gain back draft capital. So you gain probably a first-round pick and maybe a third, or a first and a fifth, or a first and a second next year, whatever it is. So you've gained some draft capital. You literally changed the entire dynamic of the draft, because now you've given John Schneider a first-round pick. Let's just say it's a mid-15th overall pick. John Schneider could turn a 15th overall pick into like 11 picks. We currently have 4. We've seen that he could do that in the past, and so
and you won't get a player as good as Jamal Adams.
No, you will not get a player as good as Jamal Adams, but you can get a player that's completely decent, good, Pro Bowl level, replacement level player at strong safety to play in place of Jamal Adams for about $5 million, $7 million, let's just say. But you could do that on a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal. You could create some bonus money there where your cap hit in the first year was $3 or $4 million. That's not probably possible with Adams. So what I'm saying is, if you're listening to Rob Staten and you're wanting to try to shift some dollars away from safety and linebacker, this is how you try to begin to do it. Because if you do extend Adams, you are literally taking, let's just say you want 17 or 18. I mean, you're looking at a $70 million contract, 4 or 5 year deal with 35, 40 million of that guaranteed for a safety. And there's no moving around. There's no moving funds from safety to the offensive line if you're going to commit that deal. So it's just something to think about. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying there's some money there. What are they?
I don't think you think about it. Because the thing is that he's
a strong side linebacker, Keith. He's not a safety. He's a strong side linebacker.
He's a safety.
Yeah.
He's not.
So he lines up in the defense, though, as a strong side linebacker, 55 or whatever percent.
That's where he's standing. That's not what his responsibilities are.
Yeah, but that's his skill set too. He's not a safety. He can't cover. He's not a very good cover guy. He's got a 45 grade from Pro Football Focus and coverage. We've seen it with our own eyes. I'm not just saying Pro Football Focus grade.
Not that bad.
He's not that good in coverage. And
Cam wasn't good in coverage.
They blitz him like 25% of the time he's on the field, it seems like. So for me, that guy is a strong side linebacker. He plays up close to the line of scrimmage on third downs, and he rushes the passer. He plays in coverage, and he drops back and defends the run on first and second down. I mean, anyway. I just think that if like going forward, in order to have Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs on the field at the same time with Amadi in the slot, and you want to play Blair, you're going to have to align Adams properly. And I think that it's easier to align Adams as a strong side linebacker and have Blair come in and be a strong safety than it is the other way around.
So other than the fact that Adams blitzes more because he's better at it, that description that you said about where he lines up and what he does, what's the difference between that
coverage
and Cam Chancellor? What's the difference between him and Cam Chancellor? Cam Chancellor was not a good cover safety.
Yeah, he wasn't good dropping back. He wasn't good backpedaling, but man, he could come up and hit you.
And that's Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams is a smaller, slightly faster Cam Chancellor who's better at pass rushing and just, well, he's smaller. He's not going to kill people.
Well, he's definitely more instinctive overall. I mean, there's no question. I understand the talent. I'm just questioning the commitment.
And I'm just saying, in this defense.
Okay, this is another.
Right?
We're going.
This is the whole show.
Yeah.
In this defense, he makes perfect sense because he is Cam.
Let's assume that Jamal Adams either plays out his contract or, and we have team control next year too. They can franchise him. Mm-hmm. So let's just say he's here. Quandre Diggs has got some money available, all unguaranteed, $6.15 million. They might adjust that a little bit. I don't think that they're going to want to ship Quandre Diggs out unless they happen to draft a free safety in the draft really high up.
Or if they can sign one that they think is comparable and cheaper.
Exactly, because the market is going to be depressed. So Quandre Diggs after free agency, and if they sign somebody, dude, he's gone. So it'll be interesting. Leno Hill, unrestricted free agent. He's not going to come back. He's just been so injured. I feel bad for the kid, but when he was on the field too, he was okay, but
he was better than his reputation.
Worth a roster spot right now.
He was better than his reputation. For some reason, Seahawks fans hate him.
What you would pay Hill to come back, you could pay somebody else
that will actually play games and not get hurt.
Demarius Randall's an interesting guy. He didn't really have a chance to show the Seahawks what he was all about, but this is a guy that Mike Mayock had as the best free safety in the 2015 draft. He's 28 years old. He was the best cover corner safety in that draft at 5'11", 196, ran a 4.46 40 in 6 seasons prior to Seattle. He had 14 interceptions, 47 pass defenses in 56 starts. That's really solid production. And he went to Green Bay with the number 30 overall pick in 2015, and then he just struggled. They shifted him. They wanted him to play corner, so he played corner for a couple of years in Green Bay. He was kind of a man without position, then running around a couple different places. He played strong safety. He played free safety. So he's kind of a hybrid kind of a guy, like a Bradley McDougald. He might be an interesting guy to call back on a veteran minimum number just to fill a spot. That's a good quality guy that's diverse. He can play slot for you. He can play some corner in a pinch and both safety spots. So I would think about a guy like that. Sorry for talking too much on Demarius Randall. Ugo Amadi clearly showed that he's a really nice, solid slot guy. Marquis Blair, one of the most intriguing guys on the roster that remains. He's got 2 years left. They have him as a free safety. He's built like a strong safety. He hits like a strong safety. And now he's a guy possibly without a position. And so what do you do with Marquis Blair? He's cheap. He's in his second year. We got him high in the draft. He's got some ability. He went out with an ACL. Where does he fit with Adams and Diggs and Amadi? And what do you do?
I think he fits right where he fit last year, as the starting nickel, and give him an opportunity to beat out Amadi for that. He's a different style player.
It's totally a different style.
Because he's
it matchup dependent, like possibly game dependent?
You think so, but the team seems to like roles, and they want to keep where they do the same thing all the time on defense. So they don't like to make a lot of those switches. So there's that. But it could be. I just think you have Blair. Between Blair and Amadi, you've got your slot.
And one of them's who's got corner experience. He's a exclusive rights free agent. He's probably going to be back. He
will be back. That's going to be a guarantee. But
he's a similar kind of guy as Marquis Blair. Marquis Blair is just more instinctive, a little bit more of a solid hitter. But Ryan Neal's got some good coverage ability and he's got a good physical presence.
He's a guy who he did a great job filling in at strong safety when everyone else got hurt. And I think that's his role, is to be a backup safety. Whereas, Blair's a guy that has starter potential. And so I think for next year, you bring him back with the idea that he's going to be the third safety. You're going to have, the same two guys on the back end, and then you're going to bring in Blair in the nickel, and you're going to play three safeties, which is going to allow Jamal Adams to do whatever the heck the team wants him to do, and then still have two safeties on the back end. And it will work. It'll work just like we saw it work for about a game. And then he got hurt.
So let's talk about the market for safeties out there in free agency really quick, in case something happens, in case Quandre Diggs, we end up trading Diggs or Adams, or who knows, right?
There is so much talent.
Or they hear that Marquis Blair is struggling a little bit with recovery, or who knows what happens. The top end of the safety market, Keith, is absurd, crazy. Right? Yeah. Justin Simmons, he's probably going to get like a $16.5 million deal. Anthony Harris, Minnesota, he's probably going to get a $14 million deal. Marcus Williams, well, somebody's going to get paid. I mean, these guys are worth it. I'm just saying, in a normal market.
In a normal market,
Marcus
they would
Williams,
get that.
Marcus May, he's, that's probably a kid that's going to get paid because he's with the New York Jets. John Johnson from the Rams, had an excellent year this year as a free safety. He's going to, he's earned a contract that's in the, $12 to $14 million range. Xavier Woods out of Dallas, he's more of a $7 million guy. Malik Hooker. So if you you moved on from Woods, a guy like Woods or Hooker would be excellent replacement guys that you could get out there.
Oh, yeah.
Especially like a Malik Hooker. He's kind of a miscast a little bit right now in like a two high safety system. He's really a one high safety. Got an excellent speed, sideline and sideline. He'd be a great fit in Seattle. Keanu O'Neal,
from the Falcons,
strong safety, might be a guy that they would bring in if they moved on from Adams. They got some draft capital, they cap relief. You could get a guy like Neal to come in and hold down the fort for you, and he plays a lot and consistent without all the injuries. And he's probably like a $5 million kind of a guy. Earl Thomas, I'm just going to say it. Earl Thomas is out there. 32 years old. He's had some mental health issues, but he can still play football. And maybe a place like Seattle that's familiar, that's home, would, and Pete Carroll. And I know the way that it ended, right? But maybe a guy like that comes back and rehabs a little bit, both on the field and off. And you could get him on a 1-year deal, like 1 year, $3 million plus some incentives to come in and play for you if Diggs were to leave. A guy like that. Just saying. Bradley McDougald is out there again. Tashawn Gibson, is another guy that it's kind of a Bradley McDougald kind of a guy, hybrid, free safety, strong safety guy. Rashawn Jenkins from the Chargers, I really like as in that hybrid role. He's a guy that I would target actually in free agency. He would be one of my guys I would hunt if either Diggs or Adams was gone, because he's 27 years old. He's 6'1", 214, ran a 4.5 40 at that size. And he ran a 4.19 short shuttle. I mean, this is a guy that can move around the football field for you. And he played like 89% of the snaps for the Chargers. And a guy like that's up and coming. The Chargers may not be able to afford him. They need to pay a lot of guys. So we'll see.
Did you mention Marcus Williams from the Saints?
Yeah, Marcus Williams.
You ran through so many names.
Sorry.
I didn't know if I caught that one or not. But guy who's 25 and would be. He's a guy that absolutely
if you get into a depressed market, you could get a guy like that.
He would never hit the open market in a normal year. There's no way they
agree.
would do what they needed to lock him
He
up.
would
He
set
would
you
never
up in a single high. Pete Carroll could run the defense that he wanted to run. Well, he ran with Earl Thomas.
Yeah, and so basically he would be a perfect fit in Seattle. But with him, like I said, he would never hit free agency. But because the Saints are way over the cap, they can't afford anyone. In fact, they can't afford the people they have under contract.
Well,
They're
he's going to be, typically he would be one of those $14 million guys.
Mm-hmm. But he's not
get paid.
But there's so many different safeties and no money.
The market's going to dry up. I mean, Denver doesn't have that kind of money. Minnesota doesn't have that money. Jets have a little bit of money. The Rams don't have any money to pay John Johnson. Dallas is going to be capped out. Indy's going to be, capped out a little bit. And that's just for safeties. I mean, we're talking offensive linemen, defensive linemen, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs. The entire market is going to be flooded with players that have been used to earning, setting market, value with their contracts, and it's not going to happen this year.
Okay, so we have one more position, and that would be cornerback. And this is one of the few positions where I think no matter what, the Seahawks will.
It's going to look a lot different.
It's going to, because both starters, at least beginning of the year starters, are unrestricted free agents. Both Quentin Dunbar and Keel Griffin. One of them's not coming back.
At least.
Or both. Because like I said, they're unrestricted, and the team just doesn't have the money to to pay both of them. I know most fans would be like, well, it's got to be Dunbar that leaves because he was terrible. Well, he was also hurt. His knee really bothered him, and eventually he ended up surgery and all of that.
I actually think that Dunbar is the more likely guy to come back, although
because I think you can have him for nothing.
Exactly. I will say though that Keel Griffin may be one of the guys out there that has his market depressed a little bit, because I know what he wants, and I know his production, and I know the market, and so he's got three factors working against him, and now he's young, he's been a quality guy, but he's been injured. And he wants more money, and I think he's worth based on where he slots in the cornerback market overall. And I think he's a middle tier cornerback who wants to be paid like a top tier guy. And so he's going to sit around for a while in free agency, I think. And eventually, I think he may end up coming back to Seattle on a 1-year deal, like a 5. He hasn't made any money yet, right? So he's been playing on really minimal contracts,
on a third round pick contract,
right? Yeah. And so if like Seattle throws $5 million at him, he may, after waiting on the market for 3 or 4 weeks, he may crawl back and pay on a 1-year deal.
The other thing is, if you look at what happened with him, the college that he picked, going to. And all of that, he did that because it was
Central Florida or whatever.
I will play for you if you also offer a scholarship to my brother.
Yes.
And it might be, hey, come back for this smaller deal, and we'll offer your brother
at least a contract.
It's
going to be a minimum, but it's going to be a contract.
A minimum contract to come play special teams again. And it might be a package deal for another year. And he is the guy who will be open to that because that's where his loyalty is.
Do you think that there would be a team, and I don't have the corner, I do have kind of the corner market. So you've got, there's a few guys out there, but he is, probably going to be one of the top.
I don't know. Patrick Peterson is going to be the top guy. Richard Sherman's out there. DJ Hayden's out there.
William Jackson the third is going to be right up there too.
AJ Bowie is out there.
Yeah, I like him actually.
Jason McCourty is.
I was going to talk to you about AJ Bowie because he's an interesting case actually. He's a guy that went undrafted in 2013. He's played with the Texans, Jacksonville, and Dallas in career 93 games. He's got 350 tackles, 66 pass defenses, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 14 interceptions, and a TD. He was injured last year a little bit, and then he ended up having a PED suspension for 6 games, and he was released. And and somebody picked him up just for the end of the season or whatever. But here's a guy that's 6 foot, 192. Here's a chance to buy low on a player that actually can give you some really decent return. So you could get him on like a 1-year, $3 million deal, like a prove it deal. Guy comes in, rehabs. He's going to be, he served 4 of the games on the suspension out of 6. So he's got 2 games suspended at the top of the year. But after that, you might have a gem that could come in and play as your second corner, opposite Reed.
Yeah, and be great. Very good player. And you're right.
The other guy is Michael Davis, I like, in that second tier market. Started the last couple years after being undrafted, and has in the last 2 years 103 tackles and 5 interceptions. And he could be available.
26 years old from the Chargers.
I like it. I mean, he's a good one. He's 6'2", 198, by the way.
Yeah, and so another player who's going to be available for a lot less money than people would have thought, because of how the playoffs ended for him, would be Kevin King.
Yeah, he'd be the natural one, right?
Yeah,
we talked about him so much.
Former Husky, went to the Packers, has been
so we
okay.
We chose Mike McDowell instead of Kevin King. Like going into the draft, Kevin King was
wrong year.
Wasn't that
the wrong year?
Oh, okay.
It was the same year that we got Shaq Griffin.
Yeah,
so it was like the year before, because everyone was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we didn't take King," but then they got Shaq Griffin, and
turned out to be the better player.
2 rounds later, and he was the better player. Right. But King will be out there. He'll be available. He's not going to cost much. After getting
Kevin King, dude, is remember he was like completely sparked up. Like he ran a 4.43 40, and
but where was that? Did you watch the playoff game when he got scorched for 3 touchdowns?
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, he looked like he was turned around, couldn't play a lick.
I think that
he ranked last in the NFL in zone coverage in 2020. Since entering the league, he's the worst tackler rated by Pro Football Focus in the league. So here's a guy that can't cover and can't tackle, but somehow or another he put together some really decent game film at the University of Washington. And where's that player? Can a guy like Pete Carroll and whoever's coaching their secondary, I can't remember his name, sorry, can they unlock anything with this guy? Can you throw a veteran minimum or slightly over veteran minimum to get him to come into Seattle and maybe start out as a third corner and work himself back? Can you? I mean, is there anything there, or would you rather spend a little bit more money and get a Rasul Douglas, who's essentially the same player? Coming out of college, they were the same. Rasul Douglas, at Carolina, drafted by the Eagles, has 180 tackles, 5 interceptions. He's okay. He'd be a decent guy. He's no worse than, say, who we currently have, in Griffin, but he's bigger. He can take away more of the field for you because he's long, 6'2", 209, and Griffin is going to give some of those contested balls up and stuff. Akela Weatherspoon's out there. That's another one. He was just San Francisco. I'm bringing these guys up. These last 3 guys we talked about, particularly Kevin King, Rasul Douglas, and Akela Weatherspoon. Those were 3 guys we highlighted in the draft that we really wanted Seattle to draft.
Witherspoon was
Tedrick Thompson's team in Colorado. He
came along really slowly with the 49ers. He looked like he might have been a draft bust, and then really came on this last year and played significantly better. Basically, he stepped in and started getting all the reps with Richard Sherman going out, and then really stepped up to the level that we all kind of thought he would be in the draft process, and finally showed it. He's a guy that if you could get him, I would. I'd go get him.
And he's 26 years old. He's 6'3", 195. He played with Richard Sherman. He's got 33-inch arms.
He is a perfect Seattle corner size talent. He knows, they play similar, like the way they do stuff down there as far as their defense. He's been playing with Sherman, so he knows, the technique and all of that. He would be a great fit to slide in to the role up here in Seattle. And the guy that you didn't mention that could come back would be Richard Sherman, because
what do you do about the injuries that are starting to creep up? Still a great player, and I'm not going to discount that, but he wants to get paid still. I mean,
he's not. I don't think he's going to get paid because of the injuries. He hasn't played much in the last 2 years, and
somebody would throw $8 million at him.
Who has the money?
New York, Jacksonville.
See, the thing is, normally in a normal year, the Jaguars. In a normal year, absolutely, someone's going to throw $8-9 million at him, especially a team that's starting over, like the Jets, because you bring in a veteran, a leader, a big personality, and so you bring in someone, and I think that would be fine. But this year, do you do that, or do you go get Patrick Peterson, who's a couple years younger and hasn't been
overrated right now?
Richard
Sherman's way better.
Oh, he's always been way better. But I'm just saying, if you're building a roster, you get a guy that's 2 years younger and doesn't have the
New York
the
roster,
injuries.
and you're Robert Saleh. You bring in a KJ Wright and a Richard Sherman, and your defense is set. I'm not talking set as far as quality overall. I'm talking set as far as leadership. The kind of guys that he wants to build around and set his defense up with. Those guys would be on my short list for sure. Richard Sherman would be a great fit in Seattle, and it would bring some of that mojo back, and it would be fun. And to see him and Adams together on the field, just creating this angst and energy.
They'd be fun.
Fun. I mean, I would just crack up. There's one other guy I would really wanted to talk about would be Chidobi Iwoozi from Dallas. We talked about him in the draft as well. All these guys kind of went into the draft together at the same time. Griffin, Douglas, King, Witherspoon, they all came out, Tedrick Thompson, they're all part of the same deal. 6 foot, 202, clocked. Here's a speed guy, clocked at 22.81 miles an hour. That's, I think, about the same as DK Metcalf. And he's good, average outside press corner as well as a zone guy. So he's diversified. He'd be a perfect guy to come in, and if we didn't get Griffin back, he'd be a guy that could step in and do that. And that's what kind of we're talking about, is if those guys leave. If they don't, I mean, if we get Griffin back, if Dunbar comes back and we have Trey Flowers and DJ Reed, really you're only looking to fill the Nico Thorpe role, or the Jason Stanley or Lyndon Stevens on the roster. And so it's not too bad. But if we lose both of our starting guys, we may be looking, and it might come in the draft. It could come in free agency. So we'll see.
Yeah. I like Witherspoon. I like that one. Yeah. I didn't bring up Iwoozi because I couldn't remember how to say his first name.
Chidobi.
The other one, where'd he go?
Mike Hilton. If you need a slot corner, Mike Hilton's, I think, one of my favorite players in the corner.
Mikel Roby-Coleman.
Yeah.
If you need a slot player.
Yeah. He had an okay year. Last year he entered free agency. We were kind of all about that, and I think the Rams let him go, and he moved on and had an okay year where he went.
Yeah, he went to the Eagles, and he just wasn't. He didn't quite.
The entire team was awful.
Yeah, he didn't quite live up to what we expected from him, but no one on that team did. That team was just bad. And
so I know we're running slightly long, but I wanted to expand for half a second, maybe longer, on the Michael Davis thing, because I really do believe that Seattle's going to be all over this guy. Again, 6'2", 198, 26 years old, started the last couple of years with the Chargers. He's fantastic. They placed a second round tender on him last year. So he played on a $3.29 million contract last year. So they do think highly of him, but they do have $23.8 million in cap space. The Chargers do right now, but look at the list of players that they need to pay. They need to pay Melvin Ingram or let him go. And he's going to make 15 or 16, at least in a normal year. They need to pay Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry's going to get the top tight end dollars in the market right now.
And he should get that.
Probably going to be a 10.5 million guy, right? Mike Pouncey, the guy you mentioned last week, is a center that could possibly be out there, and he could possibly be out there. They may decide to move on, but if they want to re-sign him, he's going to be like a $7 million guy. Denzel Perryman, their linebacker, 28 years old, one of the best, young and up-and-coming linebackers out there. He's going to make probably $6 million. Isaac Rochelle, defensive end. He's a rotation guy, but he's still going to make. Last year he played on a $825,000 contract. This year he's probably going to make $4 million, something like that. And Rashawn Jenkins, safety, 27. He made $765,000 last year. He's looking at making $5-6 million this year. He was the strong safety starter in place of Derwin James the last year and a half, with Derwin James getting hurt, and played really well. Sam Tavey, a guy that was originally undrafted, played on a $640,000 contract last year as their starting left tackle, played like 94% of the snaps. He's going to get paid as a left tackle now, like $10 million a year. So they've got a lot of people to pay. And then there's Michael Davis, so they need to decide, are they going to keep investing in their corner guy, or they got all these other guys to pay? Something's got to give with them too. And so Michael Davis might be a guy that becomes available. He's an unrestricted guy right now, so he is available, but they may elect to re-sign him. If they don't, I think Seattle's all over that, especially if we lose Griffin. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah. Over the cap values him at $6.5 million, which that's a
well, if Griffin ends up, I don't know what the market's going to be. Yeah, it's hard to predict. If Griffin ends up signing, in the first two days of free agency, and ends up getting, $9 million, good for him.
Yeah, have fun.
But if he does, we're going to need somebody else, and a guy like Michael Davis come in and get a $6 million deal would be perfectly fine for me, and a guy that I think is a better player.
Well, I mean, you kind of have to look at this market. I know, like, you're like, oh, who's going to make about 10? And I'm like, in a normal year. This isn't a normal year. Right. There is way less money to pay more players.
Right, but there are
salaries.
There are a certain group of players, and we don't know who those players. I mean, we know, but there's going to be a cliff at some point. We don't know who's going to be above the cliff and who's going to be below. He could be. I mean, there are some folks out there that have him as the second or third best corner on the market. I don't see it, but other people do. And if he is, he's likely to get paid, because corners do get paid at that top end market. So one of the teams with money to spend will end up spending it on him. That could happen. It might not, but if it does, Seattle's not going to do that. Seattle's not going to pay him. If a team ends up paying him, they're not going to try to match that deal, because it's just not worth it for him. But and they will have to move on to a different direction. Or, if he doesn't end up getting anything, chances increase significantly that he comes back and plays on a 1-year deal or some
I just think that
heavily discounted deal.
You look at, you're right. There are going to be certain guys that are like, hey, we really need this guy. He's a superstar. And they'll get paid anyway. But that cliff is going to come really quick, because there's not a lot.
Absolutely.
There's only 4 teams that have the money to really
you're
spend.
going to be looking, your tackle market, your quarterbacks, a few wide receivers, some edge rushers, and some corners are going to, and that safety group that we talked about are going to get some money, and everything else is going to dry up.
Yeah, it's going to dry up quick, and so that cliff is going to come way faster than people think, and there's going to be good players that would normally get pretty lucrative contracts available when there is no money around the league to offer them.
That's why I don't understand why the league would kill itself by not borrowing against the future a little bit, like they're asking teams to do. Essentially, they're asking teams to look into their 2022 caps and take a little bit of money out of that cupboard. I think the league should maybe do that as well. Now, I don't know what their financial situation is. I know they've lost some money with COVID in 2020, but more money, a lot more money is just around the corner.
Well,
the
league didn't lose money.
TV contracts and
the league didn't lose money. They were less profitable, but they were still very profitable. But they were less profitable, and so they had less revenue. So they have a lower cap because the cap is tied to revenue. But they didn't lose money. No team lost. No team was in the red last year. And that needs to be said.
Well, as far as the revenue sharing is concerned, correct. The individual ticket sales were non-existent for most teams, and so
true. But
individual teams did lose money. But when you add back in the revenue sharing, every
single team was in the black. All 32 teams. Nobody lost money last year.
Are you speculating, or do you know that for a fact?
I know that for a fact. Because the revenue sharing amount that each team gets from the league, from the TV money, was more than any team's expenses, like total expenses for everything. I read that from.
So ticket sales, merchandise sales, concessions, all that stuff is just icing.
It's icing
for teams.
Yeah, and so but their total revenue went down, and that's why the salary cap's going down. Every team made money, but sometimes they make, $70 million profit. That last year they made 20.
And I do know for a fact that the basement starting level negotiation number for renewed media and TV contracts is double what the current contract was.
Yeah, that's the
entry level.
That's what they presented to Disney as far as what the league wanted. They said, the last deal that they signed was 2011.
And Disney said no, but somebody else is going to say yes.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it was 2011. It's been 10 years. They're like, it's going to be way more. And so they came in, they started double. And Disney
I just want the DirecTV situation and the NFL ticket to be separate. DirecTV does not need that exclusive contract, and it needs to be opened up also to streaming, and they need to update their offering overall. Yeah. So, all right. So we've kind of put this all together. Another guy out there, just real quick, is Sidney Jones with Jacksonville. Familiar name to Seahawks fans. Played at the University of Washington. He's got some injury history with Achilles and some hamstring type stuff, but he's got a pretty decent coverage grade, and he's a second round pick in 2017 from the Eagles. And he's got 4.47 speed, 6 foot, 184, but it never really just kind of fit completely. Likely end up not being re-signed with the Eagles having issues and changing all sorts of stuff. Here's a guy that you might be able to buy low on. Another guy just to bring him. All right. So we've covered free agency. It's a good primer.
I just realized how long we've been talking.
I know. I'm sorry. I totally am. I've purposely kept the clock off on this one too. And look where we're at.
Yeah. See, that's the thing is I didn't have the clock up either. And all of a sudden I flip over to it and I'm like, oh, I knew we were running long, but.
I can edit it into 2 shows and we don't need to do next week. So
you probably could.
Upcoming shows. I have the schedule in front of me. We are going to shift again for 3 weeks until free agency starts. So we're going to start the process of evaluating prospects for the NFL draft. And we're going to start out with the quarterbacks and running backs next week, wide receivers and tight ends, offensive line. And then on March 23rd, we're going to talk about some early returns in free agency. So anything the Seahawks have done, anything out of the NFC West or throughout the league that is a hot conversation, we'll have it on that show. That'll also be with a special guest from the Emerald City podcast, Dan Bienz. So you don't want to miss that show. And then we'll get back into the draft prospects, and then we'll kind of build all the way through to the draft. So stick with us. It's a great off season. We're here every week. This is our 213th consecutive weekly show. That's a good number. And we're just going to keep building that. So we should get to around 250 something by the end of the year, which will be amazing. Be amazing. Yeah. All right. Why don't you get us out of here? I think you'll probably be quicker than me.
All right, everybody. Follow me on Twitter at Myers NFL. Follow Bill at NWCHawk, that's Northwest Seahawk. Follow the show at Hawks Playbook. The website is SeahawksPlaybook.com. You can find us there. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, everywhere. And subscribe. And don't forget, we're also on YouTube now. So if you really want to look at this ugly mug talk for an hour and 40 minutes, you can do that as well.
But don't put it on automatic replay, though.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Yeah. No, all right. Awesome. So
until next time.
Go Hawks. Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Phil is at NWCHawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.